Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI as we follow the war that has erupted between Israel, the United States, and Iran. Last night, Hezbollah joined the war. A barrage of rockets was fired into Israel from Lebanon, and Israel responded with immediate airstrikes against Hezbollah targets in Beirut and other parts of southern Lebanon. What had been until now a direct confrontation between Israel, the U.S., and Iran, as well as the Gulf states that have come under fire, it has now widened for Israel into a multi-front conflict. And this question is dramatic, because what does it mean for the continuation of this war? And what does this scenario mean for the IDF? Should we expect a potential ground offensive? Is this Hezbollah just checking off the box that it is now participating and showing solidarity with Iran? And what are also the general wider objectives of this war? Is it about the degrading of the nuclear program, decapitating the leadership, fundamentally weakening the regime? And if it is about all that, how do airstrikes get the people out to the streets to protest, to seize power, and bring down their government? To unpack all of this, I'm joined today by Lieutenant Colonel retired Or Horvitz. Or is a military intelligence veteran with almost 20 years of experience at the intersection of U.S. foreign policy, U.S.-Israel relations, intelligence, security, and previously served as the head of the Hezbollah and Lebanon branch. He was in that role in military intelligence when Hamas launched its attack on October 7, 2023, and a day later, Hezbollah joined that war. He served since then as a senior advisor to the head of military intelligence in Israel, and just recently stepped down and left and hung up his uniform. Or has a unique insight into all of the calculations from an intelligence perspective that Israel is working on. He was also in the past a liaison between the Israeli military intelligence and the U.S. intelligence community. So few people understand Hezbollah and the U.S.-Israeli intelligence axes as Or does. You'll want to hear what he has to say. Stay with us. So, Or, it's great to have you on the podcast. And once again, congratulations on joining JPPI. As I said in the introduction, Or recently finished up a long career in Israel's military intelligence. And one of his last roles was serving as the head of essentially what is the Hezbollah desk in military intelligence. And since the latest news of late last night with Hezbollah joining the war and firing barrages of rockets into Israel, Israel retaliating, Israel now calling up reserves and forces, deploying them along the border, talk of maybe a potential ground offensive by Israel inside Lebanon, I'm curious to hear from you, Or what should we make of this? What is Hezbollah exactly doing? What's their strategy? And what do they want, essentially?
So I think this is basically what would you anticipated from an organization that was built by Iran, funded by Iran for decades of years. Basically, the entire position and purpose of Hezbollah was to defend Iran in moments of truth. And this is exactly one of those moments. But something has changed quite dramatically during the last 2.5 years. And I think this is the fact that Hezbollah was severely hurt and damaged during the Operation Swords of Iron War. And I think it made him to be much more cautious and much more calculus regarding his decision making. But I think that once the supreme leader was targeted, Hezbollah didn't have any choice but to retaliate, knowing exactly the price that he will pay. I think to myself that perhaps it's even irrational move. It's something that you have to resonate with religious belief that Hezbollah leaders have, and the fact that when they see themselves first and foremost as Iranians and as Shiites. And I think that they didn't have a choice but to respond. But as you can see, it seems like the response is not full-blown war. It seems like they try to find the gap between, on the one hand, retaliating to what they perceived as a brutal violation of their red lines, their declared red lines, but on the other hand, trying to prevent full-blown Israeli war on Hezbollah, which is extremely hard to navigate. This is a very major shift from Naim Qassem decision-making up until this moment. As you remember, I think 3 or 4 months ago, we targeted their chief of staff, Tabtabai. Hezbollah didn't even fire one rocket. When we target Iran in June, Hezbollah didn't fire one rocket. And it happens also during this war, besides the fact that the supreme leader was targeted. So I think this was the cutting the threshold that made them this decision to retaliate directly towards Israel.
There's, in Israel, and I wonder how you read this, because you were there in this position on October 7th of 2023, and it's always difficult, I'm curious, like in the intelligence world, right? You never really know for certain anything to some extent, unless, I don't know, you have some sort of piece of information, but it's a lot of assessment, it's understanding, and it's messaging, right? So in other words, what you're telling us is that if they wanted full-blown war, they would have attacked differently. It's that they did it in the way they did it, so we should interpret it to be something, right? We're not talking directly, but we talk through the way we attack. Is that how to look at it?
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that we have to have some sort of humility after October 7. Even though this was my perception, or this is my perception regarding Hezbollah, we need to keep all the options off the table. There is still a chance that Hezbollah, out of many reasons, will decide to engage with all of his might, even though his might is somewhat diminished or very much diminished during the war. He can try to penetrate towards Israel. He doesn't have the same capability that he used to have, but perhaps he could do it with dozens of operatives. He can fire more rockets. He can fire further away. He could try to find all of those military capabilities in order to use them against Israel. He didn't do that during this time. And I think that if he hadn't used it in the first place, I found it less probable that he will use it as time goes by, but it will be very interesting to anticipate. I totally understand the IDF perspective, trying to take into account the fact that Hezbollah might change its calculus and might be participating in a full-blown war, and that's why you have to be cautious, and you have to be much more cautious than you used to be prior to October 7, because we know that the intelligence officer, me as well, can make mistakes, even substantial mistakes.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's true, and we've seen a lot of what that looks like. But with that said, one last question on Hezbollah, or how do you evaluate their strength? I mean, you said that they've been diminished, they've been weakened, they're not what they were on October 6, 2023, but they could still try to penetrate the border. They still have missiles. I mean, can you give us a sense of, if this were to evolve into a full-blown war with Hezbollah, what do they have now? I mean, because we tend to think in Israel that we've weakened them substantially. They're not what they were, but they were quite big on the eve of October 7th. So what do they have left?
So first, I think we need to understand what they used to have prior to October 7th. 150,000 rockets and missiles aimed up until Dimona and Beersheba, and even further away from there. They have thousands of operatives ready to launch ground attack towards Israel within hours. They had all other capabilities able to intercept our IAF capabilities, etc. They have the most mightiest military conventional force among all of our enemies. And this is something very important to understand. Now, they have much less capabilities. I assume that they can fire perhaps dozens of rockets and missiles towards Israel, nothing more in a day, and this is a very, very high estimation. I think that they can perhaps do some penetration towards Israeli territory, perhaps few operatives, nothing more. And I don't perceive that they have many other capabilities. It doesn't say that they don't have the ability to inflict damage on Israel, but it is nothing similar to what they used to have. Now they are a nuisance. We need to tackle them. We need to confront them. I see the situation during the last 12 hours as an opportunity. Israel has the opportunity now, because Hezbollah made the initiation military operation against Israel. Israel now has the excuse to continue degrading its capabilities, knowing that it can
deflect. In other words, we now have the
Yeah.
legitimacy to attack in the Dahia, to attack in Beirut, and
Exactly.
to continue to potentially take out their top leadership. But what I'm also, I know I said last question, but here's just one more.
Of course.
I'm noticing, and maybe it's just me noticing this, and maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but I'm curious your thoughts. you're seeing a lot of senior Lebanese officials, not from Hezbollah. I've seen the prime minister. I've seen Fouad Makhazumi, who might be running for prime minister in the elections that are coming up. A lot of their Twitter feeds are now with statements that they're calling on Hezbollah, respect the sovereignty of Lebanon, don't do anything. This was already before what happened last night, but also now continuing. Is Hezbollah's standing in Lebanon, has that also taken a big blow over the last couple of years, that also serves as a restraint or deterrent on Naim Qassem to do something in a bigger way?
Certainly, I think that you are witnessing in your own eyes a dramatic change within Lebanon. First of all, they have a president. They didn't have a president for years just because Hezbollah didn't want them to have. And now they have one. And not just that they have a president or a prime minister, effective prime minister, but they are also calling publicly against Hezbollah. This was something unheard of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before. And I think it says a lot about the political spectrum being changed dramatically in Lebanon just because of the war. And I think that's why I'm so optimistic regarding Lebanon, because the change is real. It's real not just against and not just towards the non-Shiite affiliates, but also within the Shiite population. I think that more and more Lebanese understand that Hezbollah is a burden rather than an asset. And I think you are seeing it through the entire spectrum of this society. And this is why Joseph Aoun, which is a politician, knows exactly that the right thing to do is to boycott Hezbollah on public. He didn't used to do that in the past. And I think this is really, really interesting. And I think that if done right, and that's why we need to be so careful with Lebanon, trying to minimize the collateral damage, trying to make them understand that when we are targeting military infrastructure within Lebanon, it is only against Hezbollah and with an effect, a beneficial effect on the Lebanese and on the state of Lebanon as a whole. And I do think that there are many Christian politicians and Sunni politicians and Druze and perhaps even Shiite politicians that deep in their heart supporting Israel operation during the last hours.
Yeah, you hear that a lot over the last couple of years. And, turning now even to Iran, where I think there's a lot of Iranians who are praying and hoping that this operation that America and Israel are now in the midst of against the Iranian government and the regime will also be successful. We're now day 3. We're 48 hours and change into this. We're still seeing Iran capable of attacking. We're seeing Iran, there's trickle of rocket fire here, some of it very devastating. We saw what happened in Beit Shemesh just the other day. 9 people, I think, were killed. There was a missile that landed in Jerusalem. A few people were wounded. I mean, these are huge missiles that cause great damage. And they're still able to strike in the UAE and Bahrain and across the region. How do you assess so far the operation itself, and do you have a handle over what it is exactly that we're all trying to achieve here?
So first, the consequences are very grim. There is no doubt about it, and we saw what happened in Beit Shemesh. That's a devastating tragedy. But we need to understand what we've anticipated regarding Iran's ability to retaliate. Iran had thousands of missiles, hundreds of kilo onwards, some of them ton or 2 tons, with the capabilities of firing ram towards Israel and towards the Gulf state. They had this capability, and this capability degraded during the operation in June, and I'm hoping that right now the IDF is degrading it substantially, along with our great friends from the US, making this threat much less imminent, much less critical. I think that all of us understood during the last years how much the missile threat is, I don't want to say existential, but something very close to that. And this is something very serious. And Iran has the ability. It is a regional superpower. It has a capability. It sees itself as a superpower, and it's huge. So they have those sorts of capabilities. And we need to take that into account. When we launched this war, this preemptive attack against Iran, we took into account that Iran will have the capabilities to inflict damage in Israel. I must say that up until this moment, and I want to say it very modestly, and I want to say it acknowledging that there is a heavy price in Israel, but still, I think that the price is less than anticipated. Again, I don't have the direct knowledge, but this is my assessment, and we can say for sure that in June, the price was much less heavier than what we've anticipated. We anticipated hundreds of casualties, and yet we launched this attack knowing that we have to confront both the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat. And I think we have the same sense now, and I'm hoping that we will have the same results in Israel. Hoping.
So that's on the terms of what they're able to do, and they're still able to fire rockets and missiles, and we have to, of course, as you said, might be smaller than we anticipated, but still have to be careful. Israel went into this, let's say in comparison to June, when it was clear that the target was the nuclear installations, and it was about setting back Iran's nuclear program, also, of course, degrading ballistic missile capability, air defenses, but the main focus was let's delay the pursuit of a nuclear weapon. It seems that until now, nuclear is secondary. Primary is the regime and the regime's institutions, capabilities, of course, regime officials. The decapitation strikes that took place in the beginning of this war, taking out the supreme leader Khamenei, as well as a long list of other top officials, right? Donald Trump has said that some of them were people that he thought could replace Khamenei, but they're now gone as well. I always say take what Trump says with a grain of salt. But what is it that we want here? I mean, it seems we want regime change, but that's not something you're easily going to achieve from the air. So how do you understand the main objective here?
So first of all, I think that both Israel and the US saw a historical change within Iran. Iran is at its lowest point in history. Since the Islamic Revolution in 79, social problems, economic problems, we saw the demonstration being crushed with tens of thousands of people being murdered on the street. We saw their military capabilities in June. And I think that Iran understands it and all the other actors understand it completely, that this is the lowest historical point, and I think it's becoming more and more evident that it is a question of when and not if. And I was very cautiously regarding anticipating what will happen with Iran, and I thought for years that it is much more resilient that we want to believe. But I think that something very dramatic have changed during the last 2.5 years. Of course, they don't have all their proxy that they used to. Their insurance policy for the existential survival of the regime, this is no longer there. If you look at Hezbollah, if you look at Syria, if you look at other actors in the region. So I think that this is the starting point for this operation. And now we can, when we craft strategy against Iran, we need to understand that as long as this regime will still stay in power, they will keep building their nuclear program. They might do it more slowly, and they will keep building their missile capability. I don't think they'll do it slowly, but even more rapid than they used to. And there is no way to confront the core issue that threatens the national interests of Israel and the state, besides trying to change this regime. And it is very, very hard. There is no way to do it from the air, but we are building upon the dramatic change that is being built within Iran. We are building on our military capabilities, and we are hoping that the 85% of the population, approximately, that are loathing this regime will march to the streets. And of course, it have to alter the strategy and the operational military capabilities that we are inflicting on Iran. For example, what we need to focus on, whether we want to focus on the Basij, whether we want to support the people who are protesting in the streets, if and when they will march towards the squares of the cities. This is a major question, but I think that the only viable strategy is one that will change this regime. It might take some time. We might reach into some sort of a ceasefire, but we have to build a strategy that will allow us to see a different regime in Iran within months, if not weeks.
How do you understand not attacking as of yet? And we're recording this. It's about 11:30 a.m. in Israel on Monday. So, a lot can still change here. But by the time this podcast drops later tonight. But so far, U.S. and Israel have avoided what I guess we could call economic targets or infrastructure, right? They're not hitting the oil refineries. They're not hitting the power plants, the water facilities. What do you make of that? I'm guessing that's by design and that's by intention.
Yeah, I think these are some sort of doomsday solution for the continuation of the operation. I think that the US and Israel have the capability to basically shut down the Iranian economy, basically perhaps even shut down Iran. But there's a major problem that comes with that. For start, you don't want to alienate the population. And I'm not sure what will be the results on the Iranian population. As I've mentioned, they are the core interest. We need to focus on them because they will be the one who will topple this regime. So we need to think very carefully whether this attacks might benefit or damage this strategy. And of course, you are building operation that might last up to a month if you ask Trump, indefinitely if you ask other officials, several weeks. Either way, you have to build a momentum and you have to have more capabilities as time goes by. But my estimations is that once Iran attack Aramco facilities in Saudi, which it did, I think, during last night, this probability is getting more likely to happen. But as I mentioned, we need to think very, very carefully on this option because I think it has some pros and cons.
So, within the framework or under the restrictions, because you only recently stepped down, so I'm conscious of the fact that you still have in your head a lot of classified information. But I do want to understand, if, as much as you can tell us, how does regime change work on the ground? So I want to assume, play along with me for a moment, that a responsible government or intelligence agency like the CIA, let's talk about them and not Israel for the moment, they have been following Iran for a long time. They're watching them. They're seeing who are the dissidents, who are the opposition figures, who should we be supporting, who should we be talking to, who should we be giving money to or equipment to. I'm guessing that in Israel as well and in Washington, they have their eye on certain groups or certain people. Now, we of course wouldn't want to tell that to the world, but that is what I mean. Are there people that you think of that they can be the ones who can lead this, or is this just going to be people flooding the streets?
So I think, first of all, you have to have people equipped with guns. There is no other way to topple this regime. So I think that you have to base your trust on several of the security apparatus within Iran that are not directly aligned to this regime. And when I say it, I meant directly to the Iranian army, or the Altesh, as it is called in Fars. And I think this is very important to look after. I'm sure that there are senior figures within the Iranian army currently in contact with several Americans, perhaps even with Israelis. And I'm hoping that there might comes a day in the upcoming weeks or days that they will take their guns and perhaps try to do something. So this is one thing that you have to make. You have to have a gunned opposition and to have dialogue with them. And the main solution to do that is through the Iranian army. The second thing that you have to do is to push hundreds of thousands of Iranians to the street, especially the Fars majority, the ones who are stationed in Tehran and in other major cities, because when you look at minority, it is much harder to conduct a revolt from there. Iran has many, many minorities, most of them stationed at the border and in the periphery. So you have to have the Fars majority going into the street like they used to have just 2 months ago.
Right.
But now I think that you have to support them and make sure that if they are coming to the street, they will be defended, that help will be on the way. And if they will feel that there is a real chance that marching in the street will topple this regime, I strongly believe that the Iranian people will come to the street. But we have to have this dual strategy. On the one hand, strengthen the parts of the Altesh that supports the opposition. You need to identify them, to speak with them, to make sure that they can operate. But also you need to push forward the population, the entire population, as much people as possible, to the street. I think if you have this combination, the likelihood of regime change will be much higher.
So this ties into another issue or another challenge, which you also have great insight into. You've spent a lot of time in the United States, not only studying at Harvard, at the Kennedy School, but you also served as an intelligence liaison in the Israeli embassy, so working very closely with Israel's American counterparts on intelligence. And Donald Trump, I want to ask you actually about how that intelligence sharing does take place. We'll get to that in a moment. But to your point now, of what you were just talking about, how you have to be focused and you have to be strategic and you have to invest in here and here. it means you have to stay focused, right? And we have a president that sometimes staying focused or staying on track is not always his strong suit, let's say. Now, I give him amazing courage and leadership and credit for this decision to embark on this operation. Wow, really historic. But as you say, this takes time, right? Do you anticipate that the Americans have the bandwidth to stay focused for the time that's needed?
Great question. First, I think that all of us need to salute Trump for his very, very good instincts regarding Iran. Trump understands, and I think he showed it over the course of his presidency, the first presidency and this presidency. He understands that Iran is the core problem in the Middle East and perhaps one of the core problems in the world. He truly understands it, and I think this is part of the reason why he made a decision to engage in this confrontation. So I think this is something very good. Now, as always, we need to take into account that there might be shift in the alignment between Israel and the US regarding the specific details. For example, what are the red lines in which Israel will not cross, but the US might cross? Let's say, for example, that Iran is willing to give up on its missile capabilities and on the nuclear capabilities completely. You might think that this is an ideal solution. President Trump might agree to that. But as I've mentioned, I think that we need to understand that as long as this regime will stay in power, the core problems that we will facing from this regime will continue. And as President Trump accurately say, we have responsibility for future generations. And even if Iran will halt the ballistic missile program and the nuclear program, they will build it afterward the moment President Trump will leave power. And I think this is something very important to understand, that the only way to tackle this regime is to take advantage of the historic opportunity that we are witnessing and to do whatever we can in order to topple this regime. I don't see any other alternatives, and I think this is the only good outcome that need to be get out of this operation.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's, and the president has said that, right? This is a historic opportunity for generations and he calls on the Iranian people to seize control of the country. Or I also want to ask you, so one of the fascinating stories that came out is about the elimination of Khamenei. And like everything, when there's a successful operation, there's a lot of people who take credit for it. It's the failures that we have issues with people taking responsibility for, but that's a conversation in another time. The Israelis have said this was our intelligence, it was our execution. The Americans have said, well, it was the CIA that provided the intelligence, and yes, it was the execution of Israel. By the way, I find it very interesting that America's taking credit for the intelligence, because they could have stood by and said it has nothing to do with us. It's basically America saying we played a pivotal, if not crucial, role in the elimination of a head of state. Israel taking out Khamenei, also a head of state, is not something that we typically do. So I'm curious on two questions. One is, I mean, we're seeing amazing partnership and cooperation here between Israel and America. I mean, I'd love to hear you talk about what that looks like. And number two is maybe just the significance of Khamenei, and what does it take for such an attack to be launched with both countries coordinating and working on it?
So first, I think that I wish more people understood how the cooperation and partnership on the intelligence and the security level is being taken forward. I think this is an amazing partnership. We are intertwined in so many ways. And that's why when you ask who is responsible for what, we did it together. And I think this is something very, very impressive. Like this entire operation, like June operation, when it doesn't really matter who is targeting the target with the bombs. I think that what we are witnessing is the shared operation that combined of shared intelligence, shared security cooperation, and I think this is something amazing. I've seen it firsthand, and I've been to, I've spoke with all my colleagues and friends in the entire intelligence agency, intelligence community in the state. I think they are impressed, and we are impressed as well. each of our sides is bringing his distinct advantage to the table, and together we are doing an amazing things. And again, this is not just a cliche, and I don't want to delve into the specific of Khamenei, but it is very interesting to see the reports on the news that, the CIA is gathering operation and Amman is gathering operation and the IF is targeting the compound. So I think, and perhaps it was even built on intelligence being gathered from the States, I don't know, satellite, other issues. This is remarkable to see it firsthand, and it is even more remarkable to see it once you are retiring, because you are, I'm impressed from what I've seen. Regarding Khamenei, perhaps the sole contributor to the program to annihilate Israel. He planned it for years. It took us time to understand that it was a concrete plan. He had in the square in Palestine Square in Tehran a clock with years regarding the time when the state of Israel will be annihilated, and he worked proactively to engage in those efforts. From Hezbollah to Hamas, to the Shiite militias in Iraq, to Yemen, to Iran itself. And I think that the fact that we were managed to target him, it is very, very important regarding the entire combat against the axis, against the Shiite axis. And I think it might be the most important domino part among all the others. And this is something very important for years to come. So I truly think that this was one of the most important and bold move, second perhaps only to Qasem Soleimani. And I assume that if you want to target Khamenei, which is a very careful man, you have to work very, very hard for months trying to understand where its location at, where he sleeps, where he stayed, with whom he communicating, with whom he meets. And this is a very, very hard intelligence operation in order to bring it to fruition. And I think what we've seen is incredibly impressive. And it's a result of months of preparation for, as I assume, both Amman, Mossad, and the American IC. But only together, I think, only the fact that they worked together made it happen.
And this is really, just one illustration of it, but the combat aircraft flying together, the refueling together, the missile defense together. I mean, there's just so many pieces to this puzzle. Really shows the importance of the U.S.-Israel military and alliance and relationship, which is something that just to close us off for you've now joined JPPI to lead a program that is looking exactly at this. Without going into too much detail, can you tell us just in a few words what is, people are now meeting you for the first time, listeners and followers of the podcast, and we have some, so I think they'll get to see you more often here. But just tell us briefly, what is the program that you're going to be working on by us?
So the program is focusing on exactly this triangle between Israel, the U.S., and the Jewish diaspora within the U.S., understanding that this is an existential necessity for the state of Israel, but also acknowledging that this is also very, very important to the U.S. itself. I used to state that Israel is perhaps the best asset that the U.S. have. And it goes both ways. Usually we try to convince why the US is so important to Israel, which is vastly true. But it is also go the other way around. Israel is very, very beneficial to the US interests, US core interests, and we are proactively promoting US interests. And I think this is very important to initiate in the JPPI, a program that deals exactly with this triangle, of course, acknowledging the importance of the Jewish diaspora in the US to this bridge. And this is what I'm trying to do. I try to work hard in order to make this triangle as important as it is, and to make people understand how important it is on both sides of the ocean. And I believe that we have the power to do so, because, as I mentioned, the facts is on our side. Now we need to project them to the public, whether it's in Israel or in the US.
Yeah. Well, Or Horvitz, retired lieutenant colonel from the IDF, new new senior fellow at JPPI. It's great to have you with us on the podcast. We'll have you more often, because really some great insight. And to our viewers and listeners, we're going to keep up with probably some of the daily podcasts over the next few days as this war does continue. So stay with us. We'll be back here tomorrow with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast.